I wish my Bible was.
All right. Here we go. Has everybody finished reading Hosea as many times as they were supposed to, going slow the last time? You went slow. Did you learn more whenever you went slow?
Yeah.
Yes. Great.
I went fast.
Okay. Next week, what we're going to do is break into 1 John. I would like to think I could get through 1 John, verse by verse, and we might try that. But Hosea is too big. I told you guys it was too big to take verse by verse. Home has points in the book of Hosea. Okay, Holy Spirit, through the mouth and pen of Hosea, used this to make his point. Points. Not one singular point, but points. What did Jesus use to teach that made him such an effective teacher to the people? All right, he used miracles to reinforce what he was teaching is true, but he used something else that was not a miracle.
Parables?
Parables. Okay, he used parables. Why were parables such a good teaching tool for Jesus?
Because it was something that they could relate to and understood.
Okay, why was it understandable?
Because it related to everyday life that they, partook in their community and how things function and things
Yes.
like that.
Okay. In the book of Hosea, he doesn't use parables to drive a point home, but he uses everyday illustrations, metaphors of sorts, to drive home his point.
Analogies. That's what
Analogies, yes. If you were trying to say that it's really raining hard, what would you say?
It's raining cats and dogs.
Okay, it's raining cats and dogs. Is it literally raining cats and dogs?
I wish.
No, it'd be a nightmare. Like, it sounds good at first, but it would be
I'm
awful.
stepping in poodles.
Right, poodles, that's awful.
You did not.
Okay,
You did. Yeah.
but we are going to look at everyday illustrations. And this is one of the themes that I picked up. Whenever you go through a book repeatedly and slowly, you will find themes. Something that is carried through the entire book, or something that is built on, and then it's like a block, and then the next layer is built on top of that. You will find that in the book of Hebrews especially. You'll find it in Hosea some too. But they build up an argument, and then they build on top of that. The same way you build a rock wall, you put a rock down here, you put some mortar, you put another rock down. We are going to look at the illustrations throughout the book of Hosea that God uses to reference Israel and Ephraim. We are going to look at the tense. Is this past, present, or future? All right? Is it positive or negative? And that is going to show us a little bit better way to understand the relationship with the actual illustration. So with the cats and dogs thing, if you say it is raining cats and dogs, you know that it is presently raining cats and dogs. It's neither positive nor negative. It's a neutral thing unless you love the rain or hate the rain, and then it would be positive or negative. And then you have your illustration, the raining cats and dogs. So you understand exactly right now that it's raining really hard because of the illustration and the tense that it's used in. We're going to do the same thing with some of the illustrations God uses. So we're going to motor through Hosea and stop and talk about each one, whether it's positive or negative, and what that has to do with their relationship with God. All right, so chapter 1 and verse 10. Somebody read chapter 1 and the first sentence in verse 10.
If the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered.
Okay. So, like the sand, the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. We have to also keep, write this down, context in mind, right? What are we talking about here at the tail end of chapter 1?
Hosea having had Gomer conceived and gave him children, and like their names and everything, and the relationship between the children's names and like how Israel is related to those names.
Okay, you're right, but 10 marks a breaking point, a turning point, if you will. We're talking about the names in the first 8 verses and the relationship between God and Israel and Hosea and Gomer, but in verse 10 there's a transition into futuristic prophecy. We can see that in the tense. Shall be. This is going to happen in the future. The number of the children of Israel shall be. This is down the road, like the sand of the sea. Further down we can see, it shall be said, children of the living God and the children of Judah and Israel shall be gathered together. When did that happen? Didn't happen in the physical kingdom ever, right? But it happened in the church. Whenever the church was established in Acts 2, Israel and Judah came together. The ones that came out of Israel and Judah were united under the church. Whenever it says like the sand of the sea, is it good to have a lot of something?
Depends on what that something
All right, it
is.
depends on what it is. If you say, I have a lot of illnesses, yes, that's a bad thing. But in this case, we're talking about the children of Israel, the children of God. These are good things, good people. So whenever we say that there's going to be a large number of them, that is a positive thing. So one thing we're going to see, I want you to think about anytime we see a positive illustration used, what tense is it in? This is futuristic. This is whenever the church is established, we're going to have this good illustration, this good large number of people. Okay, number 2, let's roll into chapter 2. And somebody read verse 3.
Lest they strip her naked and expose her as in the day she was born, and make her like a wilderness, and set her like a dry land, and slay her with thirst.
Okay. The ESV has wilderness.
Yeah, that
Make her
one.
like a wilderness. Who are we talking about here?
Gomer.
Gomer, and at the exact same time, who else are we talking about?
Israel.
Israel, okay? Here in chapter 2, at the beginning, it's talking about both of them simultaneously, Gomer and Israel. So whenever it says, strip her naked and make her as in the day she was born, that's an illustration. I chose not to include that one here, but make her like a wilderness and make her like a parched land. All right. So we know the context of it. We're talking about Israel and Gomer here. What tense is this?
Or
Future, right? Whenever I say I'm going to make Devin go rip poison ivy off of a tree and get poisoned, is that future or present? Future, right? Because I haven't made him do that yet. Whenever God is saying I'm going to make her like a wilderness or make her like a parched land, it's going to be future tense. Why is he going, let's go back to the context a little bit. Why is he going to do these things?
Because they turned against him.
Okay, that's back in verse 2, because they've taken their adultery, Gomer's literal adultery, and Israel's idolatry, and they're clinging to it. Remember we talked in chapter 2 about how whenever you care about something, you pull it close to you, or if you're studying intently, you put it up close to your face so you can see it better. That's what they were doing with their idolatry. That's why this negative illustration is going to happen, and this is going to be a negative illustration, okay? This is not a good thing. Whenever we think of wilderness, if you're an outdoorsy kind of guy or a lumberjack, I happen to be both, wilderness sounds all right because there's good timber out there, there's animals, there's berries and all kinds of fun stuff you can go and enjoy in the wilderness. But a wilderness is not that fantastic of a place to live. Like if you ever dreamed of being a mountain man like I did when I was a kid, like the wilderness is where it's at. But in reality, whenever you go into a wilderness and you try to live there, it's awful. I live out in the woods out here, and it's bad enough out there because there's always weeds growing everywhere. It's hard to grow any food out there because the weeds are trying to take it over, and there's rocks everywhere, and the trees try to shade out the garden. And it's hard to live out there in the wilderness. And like a parched land, if you think of a desert, is there life in the desert?
Hardly.
Hardly. There is some, but it's there in spite of the circumstances, not because of the circumstances. If you have beautiful grass and beautiful place just filled with grass and nice trees and fruit and everything, the animals just flock to that spot, right? Because there's food and you're able to have life there. In the desert, everything lives in the desert with a specialized adaptation that allows it to live there. Cactuses store water like crazy and have crazy deep roots to be able to get water. They get like one flood a year, they soak up as much water as they can, and they live for a year. Most plants can't do that. That's why there's no vegetation out there in the sand. The sand is awful to grow stuff in. If you ever try to garden, you can't grow stuff in straight sand. The animals that live there have specialized techniques that allow them to live there because of the heat. You don't want to be described as a place that's desolate of life or a place that refuses to be tamed. If you ever think about trying to tame a wilderness, whenever people would go and live there, if you ever see like an old homestead or an old farmhouse, what happens whenever people die or move away from there?
Decays. Like,
Okay,
The-
what else happens at the same time?
like the wilderness takes it over.
Okay, exactly. The trees start to grow up in the yard. The house starts to fall in. Grass grows up everywhere. The garden spot that used to be beautiful is nothing but weeds. It just takes over, and it refuses to be tamed. If you're able to tame the wilderness and live there, it's in spite of the wilderness's inherent traits. So, these are negative illustrations. All right, we're behind the schedule a little bit. Let's go to chapter 9 here. Chapter 4. This is one of my favorites. Chapter 4, and somebody read verse 16.
Like a stubborn heifer, Israel is stubborn. Can the Lord now feed them like a lamb in a broad pasture?
Okay. What tense is this? All right, hold on, let me back up. What context are we talking about in here? We're talking about Israel's idolatry, right? Israel's spiritual adultery, their worshiping of idols. Is this past, present, or future tense?
Present.
Okay, this is present tense, right? This is happening right now. A stubborn heifer. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? You ever help with cows, Anna? You ever have that one cow that just will not ever do what you want it to do? Do you just hate that cow's guts? Having an animal that you're trying to work with and trying to do something with it and trying to do beneficial things with it, like give it medicine or take care of it or do something that needs to be done, and they fight you every step of the way, you want to just beat them senseless. It drives you crazy when you're trying to work with an animal and they will not cooperate. Look at the comparison here. Israel is stubborn. Can the Lord now feed them like a lamb in broad pasture? There are some animals that have been trained. Like if you have a shepherd and he's working with a flock of sheep, and the sheep has a set of lambs, if you work with those lambs enough, they will come to you. At the call of your voice, they will run up to you. And you can feed them in the middle of a field. They didn't have fences the same way we have fences right now. They didn't have them contained, and they would corner them and rope them and then drag them wherever they wanted them to go. In this case, he's comparing them to somebody who just by calling to them and holding out food, they will come running up to you and you can feed them. You don't have to go chase them down and fight them every step of the way. We need to be careful not to be a stubborn heifer. in this case. A heifer is a great thing. It's a promise of the future because a heifer hasn't had calves yet, right? So she has the promise of future offspring multiplied and food for the future. But if she's stubborn and fights you every step of the way, she's worthless because she will not cooperate. We need to be careful as Christians not to be someone that has the promise of the future and future offspring, future spiritual offspring, and yet we fight God every step of the way. We do not want to be those people. All right, let's run to chapter 6. All right, chapter 6, the context here is Ephraim is getting laid into, along with Judah, by God because of their idolatry. Somebody read verse 4 for us. About that.
O Ephraim, what shall I do to you? O Judah, what shall I do to you? For your faithfulness is like a morning cloud, and like the early dew, it goes away.
Okay. The context is, again, Ephraim and Judah are getting chewed out by God because they've been unfaithful, and they deserve it. What tense is this?
This is present tense.
This is present tense. Is present tense. If I say, Jacob is looking at me, he's doing it right now, right? So your love is like a morning cloud, like the dew that goes early away. Whenever you think of love, what kind of love do you want? Regardless of the relationship, what kind of love do you actually want? Okay, never ending, a lasting love, right? Imagine, if you will, since we use the imagery of marriage like God did in Hosea, imagine being a husband or a wife to someone, and you wake up in the morning and they love you in the morning, and they're so sweet and nice to you, and they're doing everything that nice spouses do, whatever that is for you. And then at lunchtime, they don't care for you, and by evening, they've just completely abandoned you to go run around with another guy or girl. And then you wake up the next morning and you do the same pattern over and over. Can you imagine how awful that would be to be trapped in that relationship? Well, this is what God was figuratively in a relationship with Israel with. In the morning, okay, just like dew or morning fog, I used to drive to C of O every day for 2 years, and going down 65 in the early morning, there was a boatload of fog that came rolling off of Taneycomo, right there where you're going 70 miles an hour, and you just hit a fog bank where you can't see like 10 feet in front of you. And you just pray that no one's standing in the road or a car hit the bridge and is stopped in front of you, because you can't see anything until you come up out of the hill and you keep going. But by 10 o'clock, that fog was gone. The sun had come up and burned it off. It's like it wasn't even there. Or like the dew in the morning. If you go out and you work outside and you have to walk through grass in the early morning, your feet get soaked if you don't have waterproof shoes because of all that dew. But by 10 o'clock, is that there? No, the sun's burned it off. So their love was something that was there temporarily and then it was gone. And then it was there temporarily and then it was gone. It was there temporarily and it was gone. We can't be like that in our relationship with God. We need that steadfast, faithful love. All right. Chapter 7. Somebody read verse 4 for us. Oh, 7.
What? They are all adulterers, like an oven heated by a baker. He ceases stirring the fire after kneading the dough until it is kneaded.
All right. So in chapter 7, Israel and Ephraim are both getting it the same way they have been in the last few chapters. They are all adulterers. We're going to skip past that one because it's so obvious, but they're like a heated oven whose baker ceases to stir the fire. Have you ever tried, anyone here ever try smoking any meat in a smoker? Okay. Do the guys running the smokers just put wood in the fire and then leave it? Or do they sit there and they watch their little temperature gauge, they watch how the fire's burning, they adjust the air control or how much wood they put in? They are always constantly trying to make sure that that fire is burning the way they want it to, right? Like a heated oven whose baker ceases to stir the fire. The word here, the tense that shows us what tense this is in, is the word are. This is current tense. If I say Jacob and Amanda are dating, that is current tense, right? So like a heated oven whose baker ceases to stir the fire. This is a negative thing. It's burning out of control. Their negative, their sinful desires are burning out of control. Like a baker who ceases to stir the fire from the kneading of the dough until it is leavened. Let's go down to verse 8 too. Ephraim mixes himself with the peoples. He is a cake not turned. This is present tense. It's running back up to our illustration of baking with a fire. A cake not turned. Have you ever had something that you're supposed to flip halfway through cooking and you don't? Does it ever turn out the way it's supposed to, or is it like a gigantic Pinterest fail?
No, it's a penny.
It's awful because it's burnt on the bottom and like doughy on the top, and you can't eat it. There's like one section that big in the middle that's good, but you have to like scrape off the dough and the burnt stuff to get that one section of good, and it's awful. This is what Ephraim is. Have you ever put a cake into the oven and it was supposed to be so fantastic, but it turned out awful and it was just a huge disappointment? That's what Ephraim was, and that's what we don't want to be as Christians. Christians have the promise of something good, the promise of faithfulness to God. And whenever we fail in that, it's just a huge disappointment to other Christians and to God as well.
After talking about 4, I thought you were going to jump over to 6.
We could have. All of them are as hot as an oven, and they devour their rulers. Do you remember what we talked about in verse 7? Do you remember what we talked about with kings and stuff? How they were just going through kings because they were killing each other off at the tail end? This is why. They were all burning with their sinful passions, and they were just allowing that to dictate their actions. Okay, let's go into verse 11. I think we're still in 7. Yes, verse 11. Ephraim is like a dove, silly and without sense, calling to Egypt and going to Assyria. All right, is present tense, right? Like a dove. Is a dove a bad thing necessarily? No. But do they have a lot of brains? No. This is kind of like us saying, as lost as a goose in a snowstorm or something like that. Geese are not the brightest creatures ever. They have no sense of direction in a snowstorm on the ground when they're not flying, right? So, like a dove, Ephraim is silly and without sense, calling to Egypt and going to Assyria. It's obviously negative because God is calling them dumb here, right? Your actions are, to me not sugarcoat it, put it in my own words, your actions are stupid. You're acting like something that doesn't have any brains. Because they're going to Egypt and Assyria to try to build alliances to save them from being destroyed as a nation. Do we know what ends up happening anyway? What happens? I got like 3 head shakes. What happens though?
That doesn't work.
All right, in 722, Assyria rolls into town and destroys Israel. They destroy Samaria, they kill a boatload of them, and they enslave the rest of them. Egypt was laughing while staying in Egypt, watching this figuratively happen. Because they had gotten gold from Israel to help protect them from Assyria, and then they just sat back, kept the gold, and watched it happen. Assyria, they had an alliance with Assyria, but they broke that alliance whenever Assyria was making them pay too much, and they ended up getting destroyed because of it, instead of depending on God. God could have saved them from all of that, but instead they refused to listen to him. Go down to 16. They return but not upward. They're like a treacherous bow. Present tense, same context. They return but not upward. A treacherous bow. One time I was hunting with my bow, and I had sighted it in earlier that week. Didn't bother checking it because I sighted it in like 5 days ago. Made sure it was still on, and it was. And some turkeys walked out. I had never got to shoot a turkey before, right? So I managed to get Drew back, I sighted it in at the right yardage, I let fly, and I missed it by 2 feet. 2 feet wide left, dead on the height, just way off. And then all the other turkeys that were behind it that I didn't see came out and like paused and then flew down the hill. But they all like gave me a perfect shot, but I couldn't hit them because I missed so badly. The shot felt good, my form was right, my bow was off. So I went back after that to a target and shot, and my sights had gotten knocked off, and I was so mad at my bow. And myself too for not checking before I went, but mostly at my bow, because it's my bow's fault, not mine, right? My bow failed me. It was treacherous because I thought it was sighted in and it wasn't. A bow is useless if you can't hit where you're aiming with it. I mean, imagine the futility of trying to defend yourself against somebody and your gun sights always move and you never hit in the same spot. This is the illustration that God is using. You're a treacherous bow. You do not do what you're supposed to do, and you always miss the mark. You always miss the mark. Which is, interestingly enough, one of the illustrations that represents sin in the Old Testament. All right. Chapter 8, verses 8 and 9. Israel is swallowed up. Already they are among the nations as a useless vessel, for they have gone up to Assyria, a wild donkey wandering alone. Okay, in verse 8, Israel is swallowed up. Already they are among the nations as a useless vessel. Already means that it is presently happening, right? But this is a little unique because it also has a promise of the future as well. If you say something is already happening, that implies that it's going to continue happening as well. And a useless vessel. Obviously, this is negative. I had a pot at the house, a big old pot, and I tried to use it to cook a big old pot of stew or chili, I can't remember. Anyway, a big pot of something that goes in a pot. And it started leaking. There was a crack in it. And that made me so mad. I was spilling it out. I had to switch pots in the middle of cooking. It was a nightmare. All I use that pot for now is to dip dead chickens, anytime I butcher chickens, into hot water over a fire. And it smells like nasty chicken feathers that have got hot. It's useless for anything but that. Because it leaks, but slowly enough I can keep the water hot enough to dip some chickens. It's useless. A useless vessel is absolutely worthless. Imagine a pot that leaks, or I don't know what you guys use as vessels. Water bottles that you carry around that don't keep the water in them and it spills the water everywhere. That is a useless vessel. Israel is supposed to be God's vessel to contain his message of salvation to the rest of the world. But they will not do their job. Christians that fail to do that are useless vessels as well. We are supposed to contain the good word of God, the gospel, right? We're supposed to convey that to other people, carry that message to others. We are supposed to carry godly thoughts and actions in us as well. Whenever we don't do those things, we are failures, useless. We do not serve our purpose. And that is what we need to not be. They have gone up to Assyria, a wild donkey wandering alone. A wild donkey is not inherently bad, right? I mean, there's nothing actually wrong with a donkey being a wild donkey by himself. But what he's doing here is not being alone. God called Israel to be separate from everybody else, right? They're supposed to be a separate nation that doesn't look and act like everybody else. But instead, the wild donkey was going up to Assyria to try to join themselves to Assyria. They weren't alone anymore, like they were supposed to be. So this is also a negative one. All right. Let's run over to chapter 9. And somebody read first, verse 10.
Like the grapes in the wilderness, I found Israel. Like the first fruit on the fig tree in its first season, I saw your fathers.
Okay. That's good. This is bad. Okay? Bad context. The context is they are being reminded of the things they used to do and then the things that they did. Like grapes in the wilderness, I found Israel. Who doesn't like grapes, right? Grapes are good, they're sweet, they got a lot of juice, you can squeeze them into grape juice, you can drink the grape juice. Grapes are a great thing to find. He found them. Our tense is past, right? Past. This is how God found them in the past. Like a first fruit on the fig tree in its first season, I saw your fathers. I'm trying to grow apple trees right now, and a couple of peach trees, and I am probably going to scream so loud everybody in the whole county can hear me and jump and click my heels when I actually get my first apple off of a tree. Because it's going to be so exciting to finally see all that hard work and time and dedication pay off with an apple I can put in my mouth. And nobody else is getting it. It's going to be all mine. The first fruit on the fig tree in its first season. This is promising because whenever you see a fruit tree give its first fruit, it has that promise of this is going to be a productive tree throughout its entire life. This is how God found their fathers, found Israel. In the same way, a Christian, it can be described with the same illustration whenever they first become a Christian. Like a first fruit off a first tree, they have a promise of a long life of productivity ahead of them. But what happens to fruit trees that don't bear fruit? If you're in Dad's Wednesday night class, in Matthew, we're almost there in the Sermon on the Mount to what happens to fruit trees that don't bear fruit. Can anybody remember off the top of their head? They are chopped down and cast into the fire. So they are killed and thrown into the fire. The illustration there will teach us that if we are not productive as children of God, we're going to be cast into the fires of hell as a result of abandoning God and not fulfilling our duty. So, that is something that is brought to my mind whenever we look at verse 10. Down in verse 13, Ephraim, as I have seen, was like a young palm planted in the meadow. It's hot over there. It's hot right now here, but it's worse over there in the Middle East. And whenever you have a large area with no shade, and you find that one tiny little shade tree that you can sit in the shade and it cools you off, that is the most precious thing you can grab onto at the time. I mean, you do not appreciate shade trees in this part of the country like they do over there. So Ephraim was past tense, like a young palm planted in the meadow, something that gave relief to those that found it, something that was great to find, something that excited you to run across. But no longer can he say that about them. All right, in verse 10. Chapter 10, verse 1. Israel is a luxuriant vine that yields its fruit. Okay. Chapter 10 is kind of a beginning point for the rest of the chapter. And verse 1, obviously, is, present tense, a luxuriant vine that yields its fruit. Is that positive or negative?
Positive.
You think it's positive, right? It sounds positive because grapevines grow grapes, right? We love that because we like grapes. We just talked about how grapes are good. But let's go a little bit further. The more his fruit increased, the more altars he built. As his country improved, he improved his pillars. Their heart is false. They must bear their guilt. The Lord will break down their altars, and destroy their pillars. This is negative. The old saying, if you do something wrong and something wrong happens to you, you don't believe in karma, what do you believe in? That the Bible teaches, because it's right. you reap what you sow. Right? You reap what you sow. If you sow evil things, you're going to reap evil things. If you sow righteousness, you will reap righteousness. The fruit that they are yielding here from their vine is bad. So it's a negative context. It should be good because they are a vine that has the capability of growing good fruit, but instead it's producing something bad. We didn't get through every one that I have, but what I wanted you guys to see is that you never find, right, no matter what the context is, you never find a present tense positive illustration of Israel or Ephraim or even Judah necessarily. You never find a single present tense positive illustration used to describe them. It's always futuristic, talking about the church, or it's always past tense. You guys were good with so much promise, but now you are just an utter disappointment. You never find a single one. What I want you guys to see is that you can go through reading the stuff that we're going to read, and you can pick up on things like this, a theme of all the illustrations that God uses, a theme of an argument used from here, a theme of Jesus is superior in Hebrews, a theme of adultery through the book of Hosea, that's an obvious one, a theme of the possibility of redemption from adultery in Hosea. You guys can pick up on all those things and study them out to your heart's content, and you will be so much better for it whenever you do that on your own time and see it with your own eyes instead of having someone try to cram something down your throat. Okay, next week, what book are we going to be in? 1 John. You can read more Hosea. You will not learn anything about Hosea next week in class, though. You will learn about 1 John. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to read it 3 times. We're going to go slowly on the 3rd time. You guys are going to take notes on your 3rd time through. You'll cram that into your head with your own eyes and your own reading. Sound good? All right.
This time we get to talk about it.